We're overlapping a little bit as things go on. We're still in the science versus religion section, but I wanted to cap that off with bring up Neil deGrasse Tyson. Neil's director of the Hayden Planetarium at the Rose Center in New York, and you'll also recognize he's the new host of PBS's program Nova Science Now. And Neil has something that I think will very nicely fit into what came up earlier this morning. So
okay.
Lunch, by the way, is going to segue a little bit downtown. So I think it's going to be more like probably close to 2. But we started late. So are you okay?
Yeah, I'll survive.
Thank you.
Thank you. I flew in from New York City this morning, so it's dinner time, actually. So I'm ready. You got dinner for me here. Thank you first for this invitation to come present. And I'm familiar with many of your names and faces, and I'm even close friends with some of you out there. What I wanted to do was put some issues on the table that I have not seen commonly discussed, and that I think they ought to be front and center for these next several days. Unfortunately, I missed Professor Weinberg's talk because I tried to get here. I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning in New York City to get here, and the best I could do was halfway through. I missed your talk completely, but I got halfway.
You're forgiven.
Okay. But I learned from informants that, in fact, we have some significant overlap in our discussion of Islam from 1,000 years ago. So forgive me if I repeat some of what you might have already heard, but I'm going to bring it out anyway because there's a broader context that I want to share with you. And I'm told I have full control here. Let's see if this works. Oh, in case you're wondering, that's the Eagle Nebula. One of the few photos that you'll see that are this beautiful that are not by the Hubble telescope. This is a 1-meter telescope at Kitt Peak Observatory in Arizona, and the shape of the eagle is not discernible. It's barely discernible in this frame because the eagle is about 2 or 3 times the size of this, and the head of the eagle would be up here. So up here, and the wings off to the left and off to the right. Perhaps the most famous image of Hubble is a close-up of this zone right here, which has been variously be called the pillars of creation, God's fingers, and all sorts of other sort of religious references. People feel that way when they look at images of the cosmos, of course. I was always curious, though, that in the same universe you have things like the underbelly of a tarantula, and when magnified, no one thinks religious thoughts when they make those observations, when it's part of the same universe. So, but I'll get back to that in a few moments. So here, what I want to do is I want to highlight a few issues, and these are issues that came together for an essay I wrote that appeared in Natural History magazine, the Darwin issue. It was the opening of our Darwin exhibit that is now traveling. It's no longer there at the museum, but the Darwin issue collected together stories, articles on the relevance of evolution, not only as an important concept in biology, but an important concept in all of science. And I thought long and hard about how could I possibly contribute to this, because I don't know enough biology to be meaningful in that issue. And then I realized that there are elements of, in fact, the intelligent design movement that clearly there's a lot of teeth that people attending this workshop have put into that subject. And I asked myself, do I have anything to contribute to that? And I realized that I did. And so I want to sort of fill a niche that I think is left unfilled. So let's go through. Let me first start off with Ptolemy. I don't know if we know that he really looked like this, but Ptolemy, was one of the greatest scientists ever and most influential scientists. And his most important work is, of course, Al-Majest, which is Arabic for the greatest. And in it, he sort of codifies the geocentric universe. And this Earth-centered universe prevailed for centuries. until Copernicus and Galileo turned that around. But what I want to call your attention to are notes that he penned in the margin of the manuscript of his work. Let me remind you that back then, you would look up at the night sky and the planets would move against the background stars. They would wander, because that's what the word means in Greek, is wanderer. And there were 7 of these objects, the sun and moon included. And they would just kind of move. They'd go to the left, and then they'd slow down and pause, and then they'd back up, and then they'd reverse again. And this was a mystery, complete mystery. And of course, the heavens were not Earth, and so the fact that you didn't really understand what was going up there was kind of okay and expected, because that was the work of the gods. And we, being mortal down here on Earth, if you can't understand it, don't lose sleep over that fact. You perhaps never will. Now, Ptolemy had sort of the best going explanation anyone had put forth with the epicycles and the like. But nonetheless, this is the boundary between what is known and unknown about how the machinery of the universe works, and he pens these words, which for me are one of the most beautiful and poetic references to the state of one's knowledge ever written. I know that I am mortal by nature and ephemeral, but when I trace at my pleasure the windings to and fro of the heavenly bodies, I no longer touch earth with my feet. I stand in the presence of Zeus himself and take my fill of ambrosia. And so therein is this emotional, he's got this sort of religious feeling at the limits of his knowledge. And this is a trend that will continue for thousands of years to follow this. At least 2,000 years to follow this. And you don't have, and this whole notion of intelligent design, this is intelligent design. This quote that I just read to you is Ptolemy invoking intelligent design. No, he's not trying to get that into the classroom. He's not, there's the politics of intelligent design in modern times. But what I think has been swept under the rug that we have to contend with as a community of people who are sort of truth seekers is the fact that some of the greatest minds that have preceded us have done just this, okay? That's Ptolemy. But we can go on. Who else do we have? Oh, Galileo, interesting case. Galileo was kind of an exception to this. We all know he was a deeply religious man, and a lot of the trouble he got into was because he was just kind of obnoxious, all right? He could have made nice with the Pope, and he did not. And of course, I'm paraphrasing. I mean, that's the Reader's Digest version of what happened over that period. But let me share with you some lines that he wrote to Christina, who was the Grand Duchess of Tuscany. Some of these quotes you've heard before, but I think they're worth taking to heart. The Bible tells you how to go to heaven and not how the heavens go. That's one of the famous quotes attributed to Galileo. Another one is, I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with senses, reason, and intellect has intended us to forego their use. And so he was kind of I see him as one of the first to say, all right, if religion if there's any point and purpose to it, it's not to serve as a science textbook. Okay, so he was kind of the first to suggest this division, not to get rid of religion. Of course, like I said, he was a religious fellow himself. But it gets interesting when we get sort of philosophically interesting when we get to this gentleman. I can back up here. Sir Isaac Newton. Now, I don't know what you know of Isaac Newton, but everything I've read of his tells me that there's no greater genius to ever walk the surface of this earth. I'm just I don't know if you've ever felt that about anybody. I didn't feel that about anybody. But you just read what this man wrote, okay? Line by line by line. This guy was plugged into the machinery of the universe. I think he's unimpeachably brilliant. Unimpeachably brilliant. And let me read again what we heard from Mike Shermer earlier in Isaac Newton's writings. By the way, in his Principia, here's the page 0 of Principia. In it, he discovers the laws of motion, F equals ma, discover the laws of gravity. It's all there. And he did this all before he turned 26. And in this, when he talks about motion, there's no reference to God. When he talks about his two-body force that he deduced, this universal law of gravitation. There is no mention of God. It's just not anywhere there because he understood it. He was on top of it. He was there. Even though the understanding of the motions of the planets before he came along was given unto God because nobody understood it. Or nobody understood well enough to really believe that they had a full predictive handle on it in the way the universal law of gravitation supplied. And so what you have is Isaac Newton abandoning reference to God until he realizes that if all you do is calculate the two-body problem, here we have like the moon and earth. Yes, he's got that calculated. Now you have the sun and the earth. You got that. But wait a minute, now the earth and the moon go around the sun, and sometimes we're close to Mars and sometimes we're not. And when it comes near Mars, there's a tug that's stronger there than in any other part in the orbit. And then it comes over here, and then Jupiter tugs. And it's all these mini tugs. And so he's got to do this two-body problem for Earth, the moon, Earth and the sun, Earth, moon, and Mars, Earth, moon, Mars, and Jupiter, and it becomes a rapidly complex problem. And he realizes that, in fact, applying this simple sort of approach to calculating the stability of the solar system, he finds he can't stabilize the solar system. He can't account for how we have stayed this way for as long as what was possibly necessary from the beginning of the universe. And so what does he say? He's at his limits. He's at his limits. And so you read Prince, but God is nowhere until you get to the general Sholem. And then he says the 6 primary planets. Back then there were 6 planets, okay? Now there's 8, in case you haven't been keeping track. Even if you thought there were 9, there are now 8. The 6 primary planets are revolved about the sun in circles concentric with the sun, and with motions directed towards the same parts and almost in the same plane. He's got the whole picture now, and he's trying to sort of account for that. But he can't just simply doing two-body calculations, certainly not without a computer or without a new kind of mathematics. He says, but it is not to be conceived. But is it not to be conceived that mere mechanical causes could give birth to so many regular motions? This most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. This is Isaac Newton invoking intelligent design at the limits of his knowledge. And I want to put on the table the fact that you have school systems wanting to put intelligent design into the classroom, but you also have the most brilliant people who ever walked this earth doing the same thing. And so it's a deeper challenge than simply educating the public. It's deeper than, as you know, by the books written by our scientific colleagues that do take these deeply resonant and charitable positions towards their religious beliefs. Maybe the real question here, let me back up for a moment. You know, we've all seen the data. 40%, there's 90 whatever percent of the West or the American public believes in a personal God that responds to their prayers. And then you ask, what is that percentage for scientists? Averaged over disciplines, it's about 40%. And then you say, how about the elite scientists, members of the National Academy of Sciences? An article on those data recently in Nature, it said 85% of the National Academy reject a personal God. And then they compare it to 90% of the public. You know, that's not the story there. They missed the story. What that article should have said is, how come this number isn't 0? That's the story. Okay? So my esteemed colleague here, Professor Krauss here says all we have to do is make a scientifically literate public. Well, when you do, how can they do better than the scientists themselves in their percentages of who is religious and who isn't? That's kind of unrealistic, I think. So there's something else going on that nobody seems to be talking about. That as you become more scientific, yes, the religiosity drops off, but it asymptotes. It asymptotes not at 0. It asymptotes at some other level, so they should be the subject of everybody's investigation, not the public. I'm telling you. So it's not 85% reject, it's that 15% of the most brilliant minds the nation has accepts it. And that's something that we can't just sweep under the rug. Otherwise, we're being disingenuous to the efforts here. And I know I'll stand between you and lunch here, so let me try to go quickly. If you don't think, I think Newton is one of the most brilliant, like the most brilliant ever to sort of walk the earth. And I'm not alone in feeling this. This is his statue in Trinity Church in Cambridge, and he's through the open doorway there. And so you get close to the statue. He's without his curls here. I was deeply upset by that. I thought he was like really trendy with his long hair, but apparently that was probably just a wig at all times. You look at the base of the statue, loosely translated, of the genus of all who have ever been human, there is no greater intellect than this man. And so I'm not alone in this sentiment. And this man wrote those words. So, but let's move on, because there's more to talk about here. We don't have to stop at Newton. Let's go to Christian Huygens, all right? Brilliant scientist. I mean, he was great at chemistry, biology, physics, math, Dutch scientist. And he died the year that this work was published, one of my favorite works of science writing, and it's Cosmotheros, which is an exploration on the likelihood of there being life on the known planets, using the available knowledge of the day. So, for example, they knew that, by the way, Huygens was the first to identify Saturn's ring as a ring. If I got that right, Carolyn, is that correct? Oh, no, I thought he was the first to calculate that it would be a ring. He was then Huygens would be the first to observe it. Okay. We have Madam Saturn here in the room, in case you don't know. Okay. My colleague Carolyn Porco, who we'll be hearing from later, I've just been told. But anyhow, so Huygens, brilliant fellow, and one of the probes on the Cassini spacecraft was called Huygens, a European probe that descended to the surface of Titan. And so he's an important figure in the history of science. So what does he say in his writings? Well, you look at the year, 1696, gravity was well known, laws of motion were well known, Newton was quite influential well before the turn of the century there. And so when he talks about the orbits of the planets, it's done. Talks about the moons of Jupiter, done. Talks about the new rings around Saturn, done. It's all fine. But when he talks about biology and life, something that's not well understood then or today, boom, there goes his references to God. But references to God were nowhere else in those writings. Nowhere else. He says, I suppose nobody would deny but that there's somewhat more of contrivance, somewhat more of miracle in the production and growth of plants and animals than in lifeless heaps of inanimate bodies. For the finger of God and the wisdom of divine providence is in them, much more clearly manifested than in the other. He doesn't say that about the orbits. We're done with the orbits, as Mike Shermer had noted. We're done. He's in a place where nobody really has the answer. So he invokes, this is intelligent design once again. Pure out, flat and simple. So, you know this story. I have to tell it because it's just great. All right? So Laplace, Pierre Simon de Laplace, at the end of the 18th century, wrote a 5-volume tome on celestial mechanics. A brilliant piece of work. It's there. It weighs a lot on the shelf. And what it does is it takes Newton's laws of gravity and brings them into a full expression with the hammer of calculus. Okay? He brings all the armament of mathematics to bear on the laws of physics that were put forth by Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton only touched on them. They were not fully developed. And in this work, he demonstrates, he further develops something that had been percolating in the mathematical community, but he develops, and one might even say perfects, a branch of math we would call perturbation theory, where instead of pulling your hair out saying, well, how do you calculate this pair of forces and this pair, and all the equations go to hell, in perturbation theory, it allows you to systematically and reliably calculate the effect of a small tug in the presence, a series of small tugs in the presence of singular big tugs. And that's kind of what's going on in most of the solar system. And when you do that, and you do that properly, you can demonstrate, notwithstanding effects of chaos, which have other timescales related to them, you can demonstrate that, in fact, the solar system was stable beyond the predictions of Isaac Newton. So, he figures this out, does not invoke God, because he figured it out. And in a story that may be apocryphal, but I see more in support of it than against it, this time coincides, of course, with the era of Napoleon, Napoleon being French, and Laplace being French, no translation necessary. Napoleon, if you visited his library, it's not just sort of books of world history and battles, it's engineering books, it's physics books. This man wanted to know where his cannonballs would land, all right? He was much more than just sort of a lucky general. He was into the physics, the engineering, and the material science of war. And so he immediately summoned up the 5-volume production of Laplace, read it through, cover to cover, called in Laplace, and said, "Sir, I have the exact quote here. Hang on. Napoleon asked him what role God played in the construction and regulation of the heavens. This is kind of like, that's what Newton would ask, right? Laplace replies, "Sir, I had no need for that hypothesis." And so what concerns me now is, even if you're as brilliant as Newton, you reach a point where you start basking in the majesty of God, and then your discovery stops. It just stops. You're kind of no good anymore for advancing that frontier, waiting for somebody else to come behind you who doesn't have God on the brain and who says, "That's a really cool problem, I want to solve it." They come in and solve it. But look at the time delay. This was a 100-year time delay. And the math that's in perturbation theory is like crumbs for Newton. He could have come up with that. The guy invented calculus just on a dare, practically. When someone asked him, Ike, how come planets orbit in ellipses and not some other shape? And he couldn't answer that. He goes home for 2 months, comes back, out comes integral differential calculus, because he needed that to answer that question. And so this is the kind of mind we were dealing with Newton. He could have gone there, but he didn't. He didn't. His religiosity stopped him. And so we're left with the realization, of course, that intelligent design, while real in the history of science, while real in the presence of sort of philosophical drivers, is nonetheless a philosophy of ignorance. And so regardless of what our political agenda is, all you have to say is science is a philosophy of discovery, intelligent design is a philosophy of ignorance. That's all. I don't need to see have you discovered anything lately? If not, get out of the science classroom. But I'm not going to say, don't teach this, because it's real, it happened. So I don't want people to sweep it under the rug, because if you do, you're neglecting something fundamental that's going on in people's minds when they confront things they don't understand. And it happens to the greatest of the minds, as it happens to everyone else, many, if not most other people in the public. So let me blow through some last set of slides here. I want to call something to your attention that we all know intuitively, whether or not you've thought about it explicitly. You go around the world and you find times and places where nations have excelled in one subject or another. There's a birth of that period of where they excel, and then there's a peak, and sometimes it drops off, and sometimes they hang on. And so you can ask the culture of that. What was going on in that nation to support those discoveries? And then what happened when they ended? And so I call that sort of naming rights. If you were there first and you did it best, you name things. Particle physics in this country, in the United States, was like going gangbusters after the Second World War. And the discovery of atomic elements, look at the periodic table. There's berkelium, californium, we got half the United States up there in the upper, heavier elements of the periodic table. Am I right there, Sir Weinberg? Okay, I don't want to. That's not because the world liked California or Berkeley. It's because the work was done here. It's because there was an effort to excel in just those subjects. And it shows up in other ways. I'll give you just briefly. Part of the naming rights is that you don't have to name it. So, for example, while we didn't invent the internet, we certainly exploited it here in America. We did that sort of first and best. And so your email address does not end in .us. Everybody else is in the world. They got to say what country they came from. We don't. Okay? It's simple, but it's the consequence of being there first and doing it better than anyone had done it before. Do you know that the British postage stamp is the only postage stamp in the world that does not identify the country of origin? Because they invented postage stamps. So why should they have to say what country it is? It's their invention. Okay? Check them out. It's just the facts of this. The constellations of the night sky. It's the Greek and Roman, and it's lasted to this time because they did a really good job thinking that stuff up. All the mythologies of the heavens, that really stuck with us. All right, so I'm going to make a larger point. Not to get gratuitous on you here, but September 11th, 2001, as we all know, this was going on in New York City. This is the view outside of my window. I live 4 blocks from ground zero. Excuse me, this is the corner of the building in which I live. I went outside to get this view. I was at the time judging whether I should go collect my daughter, who was in an elementary school 2 blocks north of the North Tower. North is to the right in this picture. So I want to get a closer view with a highly magnified zoom lens to see what, while that was happening, the plane flew into the South Tower. And so no one was thinking terrorism until the second one was hit. The first one was just sort of a bad tragedy. And so these are just 3 frames from my camcorder. This is at t equals 0. This is 1 second, well, like actually a fraction of a second. The plane was moving probably 500 miles an hour. And just to understand, the black building, that black sort of monolithic building, that is 50 stories tall. This is New York City, people. So tall buildings are kind of, they're just all over the place. And that's just a hotel, a 50-story hotel. And it's the towers are foreshortened because they're the angle at which this is shown. I put these up because a few days after this, President Bush, I don't remember where he said this, on the steps of the White House, in the Rose Garden or at the Capitol, in an attempt to distinguish we from they, the terrorists who flew these planes into the buildings and into the, that went down in Pennsylvania and in Washington, to distinguish we from they, he loosely quotes a phrase out of the Bible by saying, our God is the God who named the stars. Now, this is before I was on his Rolodex, okay? Because I could have helped him out there. The fact is, of all the stars that have names, 2/3 of them have Arabic names. So this was not, I don't think, his intent with that message. Okay? While the constellations are Greek and Roman, the names are Arabic, all right? And the list just goes on and on and on and on. And so where does this come from? How does this happen? How do you get stars named with Arabic names? How does this happen? And it happens because, of course, hang on, just catching up with myself here. Okay? It happens because there was this particularly fertile period that Professor Weinberg duly discussed. And around that period, that 300-year period, the intellectual center of the world was Baghdad. Baghdad. It was completely open to all visitors, all travelers, Jews, Christians, doubters, which today we might call atheists. They were all there exchanging ideas, all of them. All of them. And it was that period where you had the advances in like engineering and biology and medicine and mathematics. All right? Our numerals are called what? Arabic numerals. They ever stop and think about that? You know, who as in America, do we take pause at this? Why are they called Arabic numerals? Okay, they fully exploit the discovery of the zero, create a whole field called algebra, itself an Arabic word. Algorithm is an Arabic word. All this is going on, and it's all traceable, not to some long 1,000-year tradition in Islam. It's traceable to this 300-year period. This 300-year period. And then, so they had naming rights. The most expensive, beautifully carved astrolabes come out of this period. There's a great collection of these at the Adler Planetarium in Chicago, if you ever want to check them out. So navigation, celestial navigation, all of this is traceable to this period. And so something happened. And what happened, as was previously described, I was told, and forgive me for repeating from what you might have heard, 12th century kicks in, and then you get the influence of this scholar, Al-Ghazali, all right? And so out of his work, you get the philosophy that mathematics is the work of the devil. And nothing good can come of that philosophy. that combined with other sort of codification, philosophical codifications of what Islam was and would become, the entire intellectual foundation of that enterprise collapsed, and it has not recovered since. Over that period, all these books were translated into Arabic on a scale not seen since then. And so why am I even going here? Because I'm trying to explain to you that you fast forward, the dangers here is that you fast forward to 21st century America and ask, what influences are we feeling now? Because that naming period in Islam stopped and it never recovered. Because the way of thinking about the natural world, revelation replaced investigation. Okay? So I fast forward to 21st century, and what do you find? You get things like this. Okay? This is in America. All right? So now, what I find interesting is the level of passion that it requires to actually do it. You got to like pay for this, okay? And it means a lot of people are pissed off at the Big Bang. They're pissed off at the Big Bang. At our museum in New York, the American Museum of Natural History, they come to the Big Bang exhibit, and sometimes I don't feel like having that conversation. I say, why don't you go to our hall of human biology first, and then come to us? And that's where we have sort of monkeys holding hands with people in skeleton forms, and then they never make it back to the Big Bang. They're gone forever. Okay, so however egregious the Big Bang is, monkeys and people is a worse transgression, apparently. So there's that, but there's also, here's a little bit of intelligent design here. Here's one that wants to accept the science, but then is like what's before the Big Bang. We don't quite know yet, so God was there. So of course, intelligent design is basically a God of the gaps. But my favorite way to end this, then, is to just reflect on, I want to do it just a fast tirade on stupid design, and this will be fast. Look at all the things that just want to kill us, okay? Most planet orbits are unstable. Star formation is completely inefficient. Most places in the universe will kill life instantly. Instantly. There are people that say, oh, the forces of nature are just right for life. Excuse me. Just look at the volume of the universe where you can't live. You will die instantly. That's not what I call the Garden of Eden, all right? Galaxy orbits that we orbit once every couple hundred million years, you're bound to come close to a supernova that will wipe out your ozone layer and kill everybody on the surface who doesn't otherwise have dark skin, because your high energy rays will give you skin cancer. We're on a collision course with the Andromeda Galaxy. Gone is this beautiful spiral that we have. And, of course, we're on a one-way expanding universe as we wind down to oblivion, as the temperature of the universe asymptotically approaches absolute zero. That's the universe. Then Earth, volcanoes, tsunami just killed, I think that number's higher, up 200,000 people, floods, tornadoes. None of this is any sign that there's a benevolent anything out there. And this 90% should be 99%, as was earlier noted. That's of all life that has ever lived is now extinct. Inner solar system is a shooting gallery, comets, asteroids, duck. And look how long it took to make multicellular life. Not from the beginning of the Earth. Life happened quickly, but not multicellular life. You needed your cyanobacteria to sort of crank on the oxygen, get the oxygen budget going. Then you could have that's sort of rocket fuel for multicellular creatures. But that took 3.5 billion years. That's hardly an efficient plan with us in mind. And in human beings, this is like the most tragic of them. I don't even include here the expression of free will where people want to kill each other. I'm talking about nature killing us without the help of human beings. Aggressive childhood leukemia, hemophilia, all of this. And we so much praise about the human eye, but anyone who's seen the full breadth of the electromagnetic spectrum will recognize how blind we are. Okay? And part of that blindness means we can't see, we can't detect magnetic fields, ionizing radiation, radon. We are like sitting ducks for ionizing radiation. We have to eat constantly because we're warm-blooded. Crocodile eat a chicken a month, it's fine. Okay? So we're always looking for food. These gases at the bottom, you can't smell them, taste them, you breathe them in, you're dead. Okay? So I'm almost done. I'm sorry, I'm taking up your time here. And with the birth defects, most are unknown. Look at this. Others, it's like abuse and infection and stuff that human beings had something to do with. We have no idea. Oops, I pushed a button by accident, sorry. No idea. No idea. And, and birth defects are tragic. They're tragic, particularly if they happen to the family afflicted by it. And you just look at images of these aborted fetuses because of and most of these are stillborn. Others are born with a heart outside the body. And so this is all simply stupid design. And the problem is, if you look for what is intelligent, and you can find some things that are just really beautiful and really, hey, that's a clever. The ball socket of the shoulder, and a lot of things you can point to, but then you stop looking at all the things that confound that revelation. And so if I came upon a frozen waterfall and it just struck me for all its beauty, I would then turn over the rock and try to find a millipede, okay, or some kind of deadly newt, and then put that in context and realize, of course, the universe is not here for us, for any singular purpose. My favorite of all is, of course, you breathe, eat, and drink through the same hole in your body, guaranteeing that some percent of us will choke to death every year, okay? Imagine if you had a separate hole for breathing and eating and talking. That would be just really cool, right? You could drink, breathe, and just talk, and you would never choke, all right? And it's not a hard request. Dolphins breathe and eat through different holes in their body. And that's a mammal. So this is like Santa Claus could bring this one. And this one, of course, my favorite of all, what's this going on between our legs, right? As you've heard, you've heard it. It's like an entertainment complex in the middle of a sewage system. No engineer would design that at all, ever. It's like the wrong juxtaposition of elements. So what I want to put on the table is the fact that I don't want the religious person in the lab telling me that God is responsible for what it is they cannot discover. Because look at the hubris of that. You're in the lab and you say, I don't know how this works. And not only that, no one alive on earth knows how this works. And not only that, no one who will ever be born will know how this works. That's kind of audacious when you think about it. And then you put it down and go on to the next problem. If this problem is a cure for Alzheimer's or cancer or whatever else, I don't want them in the science classroom. And so the issue is simply about progress and discovery. And in my recent forays into Washington, well, I've been closer to a community of Republicans than I have ever been in my life, because I grew up in New York City. And in New York City, I think that person is Republican back there. You see? No, not that one, the one behind that person. Yeah, that's a Republican. There's another one. That's in New York. So you grow up this way, and I get sort of baptized into a Republican administration. I had 2 consecutive appointments in the Bush administration, one on the aerospace industry, and one on space exploration, NASA's future, basically. And I realized something, spending that much time in the community of powerful Republicans, that Republicans, above all else, do not want to die poor. So there's a limit to how far this will go. And I bet most people in this room, even those assembled at this table, were highly concerned about the Dover trial, wondering how that would turn. And I looked at that and I said, I'm not worried, because it's a Republican judge. And in the end, if you put people who are not making discoveries in the science classroom, that is the end of the foundation of your future economy. And so I had a little more confidence than others did because of this sensitivity to the money aspect of it. But we all know tomorrow's economies will be founded on innovations in science and technology, and of course that gets cut short if we lose our civilization, as what happened in Islam in 1100. And the last thought I'll leave you with, which concerns me greatly, if you do the math, okay? Just look, you look at all the Nobel Prize winners there ever were, some even in this room, and ask how many were Muslim. And it's like 1, maybe 2, okay? I think a second one was in economics. And the one we referred to was described earlier, the co-winner of the Nobel Prize with Professor Weinberg, Abdus Salam. And he's not Middle Eastern Muslim, he's Pakistani Muslim. Okay? Now, how many Nobel Prizes are won by Jews? It's like the fourth of the Nobel Prizes. Okay? Some high fraction of the total. And then you look, how many Muslims are there in the world? It's like 1 billion Muslims. How many Jews? 15 million tops. Okay? So you could ratio these numbers. Had Islam not collapsed in its intellectual standing in the year 1100, and you just do the ratios, they would have every single Nobel Prize today. So the fact that it's not only just a few, it's near zero, is deeply worrying. I'm concerned about what lost, what brilliance may have expressed itself and did not in that community over the past 1,000 years. And so what I want to put on the table is why, so that's the end of my talk, but I want to say, I want to put on the table not why 85% of the National Academy rejects God. I want to know why 15% don't. And that's really what we got to address here. Otherwise, the public is secondary to this. Thank you for your attention here.
So I suspect there may be some questions from the people at the table, some responses.
It's hard to know how to respond to Neil ever, but the question that you asked about why 15% disturbs me a little bit, because this other presumption that scientists are somehow not people, and that they don't have the same delusions, and how many of them are pedophiles in the National Academy of Sciences? I don't know. How many of them are Republicans? And so it would be amazing, of course, if it were zero. That would be the news story. But the point is, I don't think you'll expect any of them, in general, to have their religion, for them to view their religion as a bulwark against science, or to view the need to fly into buildings, or whatever the point is. So the delusions or the predilections of individual scientists are important to recognize. That scientists are people, and they're as full of delusions about every aspect of their life as everyone else. We all make up inventions so we can rationalize our existence and why we are who we are.
But Lawrence, if you can't convert our colleagues, why do you have any hope you're going to convert the public?
I don't think we have to convert those people. They're fine. That's the point. They're doing science. They're no problem. That's why. I don't understand why you need to do that.
The figure is actually, I believe it's 7%, not 15%. Yeah. It's even worse. But it's in a way it's sort of irrelevant, like you said. How many of them are also conservative or liberal? From a social scientist's point of view, it's just what are the different variables that go into somebody's belief system. So at the end of my book, Why People Believe Weird Things, the last chapter is called Why Smart People Believe Weird Things, which is the harder question to answer. And the short answer to that is because they're better at rationalizing beliefs they arrived at for non-smart reasons, which is to say most of the beliefs that most of us hold, you arrive at because you were raised that way, or you were influenced by peers or mentors, or there's some psychological comfort to it, or whatever. But because we live in the age of science, you're supposed to justify your beliefs. So you using the after-the-fact reasoning, you go back and look for reasons to justify it. And smart people are just better at that. And not just in religion, they're better at rationalizing why they're conservatives or liberals, or whatever economic ideologies they support, or whatever, across the board. And but really, from a social scientist's point of view, there's obviously a relationship between education and intelligence and religiosity. It goes down. It does. It absolutely goes down as education goes up. There's a reverse correlation. It's undeniable in study after study, and it's just one of many variables that you would look at like that. So there's obviously something going on there that's meaningful.
Can I interject quickly that what we don't often see is the effect of your education level subtracted out of the effect of being a scientist in your likelihood of being religious. So in other words, we say we say this 40% figure for the nation's scientists, but we don't, and all scientists in that study have PhDs. So we have to ask what percentage of PhDs in any field are religious. That number is less than the figure for the general public. And so you're already sort of halfway there just by having the PhD in any field. And now you ask, what effect does being a scientist have on it? And it's a smaller effect than we're otherwise granting it, if you don't otherwise cite the being educated effect.
I think it was the engineers of the scientists were the most likely to believe, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the mathematicians were high up.
Biologists were the least likely to believe. Yeah.
Another thing that was interesting in that poll was that physicians were more likely than scientists. 60% of U.S. physicians believe in a personal God. And I think that probably shouldn't be surprising, simply because physicians are the people who have to tell people all day long that they're going to die, or they tell the family that their family member is going to die. And I think death is very much central to this. This what is otherwise quite an astonishing feature of our discourse, that so many people believe the preposterous. I mean, there is no story that is going to so totally inure you to the tragedy of the death of your own child better than the story that she has been taken up to be with Jesus again, and you're gonna see her in a few short years. And so these religious myths are paying enormous dividends, emotional dividends for people. And I think it is the job of science to present a fully positive account of just how we can be happy and in this world and reconciled to our circumstance. One which, the alternative that religion is essentially offering people in that situation is the alternative to learning how to grieve. I mean, rather than learn how to grieve as children, we learn how to believe that death doesn't exist, or is in some cases a good thing, the best thing that could possibly happen to you as you get in this cult of martyrdom. But one thing I think we should call attention to here is something that Michael brought up in his talk, is that there's a difference between, in a context like this, calling a spade and really calling delusion, and doing it across the board in every social situation where you become this boorish character who, you get into an elevator and you see someone with a cross around her neck and you lurch toward her and try to take away Jesus in that moment. This is not something that anyone, I think, is advocating. I'm probably one of the more strident people here, and I'm not advocating that. But I think that even here we are suffering the taboos that I'm trying to call attention to, and I know Richard quite eloquently and for many years has been calling attention to, the taboo around criticizing these esteemed religious myths. We can laugh at a belief in Zeus, but we can't laugh at a belief in Allah or the biblical God, even here. And I just want to point out that, I mean, our situation is so uncanny. I mean, we have a world that has been shattered by literature, and I think we have to marshal an emotional response that the same response we would have if we woke up in a world tomorrow where, all the violence in the Middle East, all the bloodletting, all the wars and threat of future war was born of rival interpretations of the plays of Shakespeare, where the Jews like King Lear and the Muslims like Hamlet, and they're willing to blow themselves up in crowds of children over the difference. Okay, that seems like an impossibly bizarre world to live in, and yet that is exactly the world we are living in. And if we could come face to face with that strangeness, I think we wouldn't be wasting much time wondering about whether there is a conflict between religion and science.
One thing I'd like to do at this point, the idea at this point is I would like to actually get some audience comments, because I think we've gone on long enough. I think I see a lot of people looking there, agitated, wanting to say something. So we could just take a few audience comments, and then we'll have Stephen Weinberg lead us into lunch, moving on to the If Not God, Then What section, just a brief thing to think about over lunch. And then after lunch, we'll come back with Joan, with Carolyn Porco, and a couple of others to go and discuss those issues. But I think it would be a good idea to get some interaction from you all, because I think you've been sitting there wanting to say things for quite a while. So, Mazarine.
So it seems to me that, you and we agree on what the problem is, but there seem to be...
yourselves?
Pardon me. Oh, I'm Mazarine Banaji from the Department of Psychology at Harvard. you all agree on so many basic assumptions. Where the differences lie, it seems to me, is in how we ought to treat those who think so differently from us. And so my question to you is, given that there have been ways in which propaganda machines have been set up in the past to convert large groups of people, and we've known how to do that effectively in certain parts of the world and not as well in others, is there something about the scientific agenda that sort of handicaps us in a particular way? In other words, if the Warren Buffett, Bill Gates Foundation were to give you the $30 billion that is now only half their endowment, what would you want to do with it to bring about change in the manner in which you see it appropriate?
Let me give you one quick answer. I mean, I spend a lot of time in the public arena now, and scientists are particularly handicapped because you don't deal with lies very easily. The amazing Randy did a wonderful example of, he had two assistants who he got to go into a ESP testing laboratory, and he said, fool them. And if anyone ever asks you if you're cheating, say, yeah, I'm cheating. And of course, the study came up with two wonderful examples of people at ESP. And the reason the scientists never, you presume that there's an honest discussion. And in the public domain, in the domain of public relations and politics, which is what a lot of this is involved with, vitally, you can't just assume that the truth is going to win out. You can't just assume, when I pick up a physics journal, physical review, I say, that's garbage, that's garbage, that's garbage. And a lot of it's garbage, but I don't spend my time writing articles saying it's garbage because I know it's going to fall by the wayside. But in the public domain, a lot of the garbage isn't going to fall by the wayside. You have to actively create a public relations campaign. You have to think about sound bites, and you have to become an evangelist. And that's very difficult, I think, for much of the scientific community to do. It's not in their nature. And so I think there are inherent handicaps to combating certain well-funded groups whose existence is based on public relations and manipulating the truth.
Well, if I had half the $30 billion, I would call the United States every week from my island and check in with the Skeptic Society and see how they're doing there. And although it's true, Neil, we can't talk people out of their religious beliefs any more than we can talk them out of being conservative or liberal or any belief system they're behaviorally committed to. But we can offer something else and let them come to it in their own good time. I thought of an analogy of this just a couple days ago in I think it was in the LA Times calendar section or one of the Variety movie papers. They were running ads for all the awards for the upcoming film festivals, and every one of them at the top says, "For your consideration." And then there's the ad for the film and all the good things about the film. So in a way, all the books that we write and articles and so on, in a way it's saying, for your consideration. Here, think about this. Richard's idea of consciousness raising, it's not that we're going to convert people, but here's an alternative. Try it on. Sometimes I'll say, just try being an atheist for an hour and see how it goes. And you can always, back off or try it for a day or something like that, and just see it how it goes. You can't force it to happen, but it can happen if there's something available. So our job is just to make it available, something appealing.
Okay, there's one question here from Patricia Churchson, who's chair of philosophy at UCSD.
Hi, I want to follow up Marja Banerjee's point because I think that you're not being imaginative enough in your response. Marja's suggestion is not that you get the scientists to actually do this PR campaign, but that you hire a PR firm and you say, look, what we want to do is make available to the public the kind of story that Neil told. And do it in a way that's persuasive. You guys are the ones who are supposed to be in the business of persuading people. Get the sound bites right, get the timing right, hit the right television shows. Bill Gates has provided $30 million to do this. We'll start you on $10 million. Let's go. But I don't think that what you really want to do is get the scientists to sort of timidly come out and say, well, you really want to think about how that we're not that great at it, most of us. So give the job to people who know how to do it. I mean, give it to professionals. Thank you. I mean, if it's an economic matter, and I think that was one of the brilliant parts of Neil's talk, if it's an economic matter, I mean, there's a lot of people who care about the economic future of this country. So if it's an economic matter, get the PR company onto it. As
my wife often reminds me, most people don't give a hoot. Science, I mean, I think it's nice if someone gave us $30 billion, but TV stations march with their feet. I and other people like to try and get things, science on TV and other things. And the reason they're not on hold on a second, they're not on ABC and NBC and CBS is, for the most part, people figure there's not a lot of money to be made and it would be nice to try and convince them otherwise. But for the moment, I think it's very difficult to try and get a lot of money on PR on science, because it's not perceived by those people who are willing to spend the money as being a way to make money.
Sorry, I don't mean to be tedious, but if I may just follow that up. Neil's point was that having a culture of ignorance as opposed to a culture of discovery is in the long run bad for economics. That's the point. And I think if that point can be got across in a way that's appealing, so I'm not necessarily talking about getting people to be more scientifically literate. I'm talking about getting them to see that science is in their economic interest.
I spoke at the American Enterprise Institute, which is as conservative as it gets, because they recognize that this is indeed bad for the economy. But I think there are large-scale reasons why they don't particularly care if there's a large number of uneducated people.
I actually think that the presence of certain people in this room shows that some scientists and philosophers are actually pretty good communicators. So I'm delighted to have a chance to introduce Scott Atran. You had a question? Okay, could you just say who you are?
Scott Atran from the National Center for Scientific Research in Paris. There seems to be a conflation of two problems. The first is keeping non-scientific thoughts, irrational thoughts, out of science. Noble enterprise. The second is introducing science as a rational way of doing ethics and politics. Is there the slightest historical evidence whatsoever that the involvement of science in politics or ethics has done anything or could do anything to improve the human condition?
I don't think anyone here has suggested that. Your remark seems irrelevant to what's been said.
There's no suggestion that...
No one has suggested that science provides a way of being more ethical or
that it engages in politics. It tells suicide bombers, for example, that they're...
Well, it may remove motivations for bad behavior, but it itself doesn't provide a moral... I mean, science doesn't provide a moral standard. It has nothing to do with that. It may provide a way of puncturing other vicious moral standards.
Well, except as a subset of Enlightenment values of reason, of which science is a part. Certainly there, in the Jeffersonian sense, of course we want to apply reason to political decisions. Absolutely. So I think there it's relevant.
I don't think you shouldn't construe science narrowly in this sense, because the way I look at it is when the stakes are high, we have a choice between conversation and violence. I mean, both interpersonally and at the level of nations, we have a choice between conversation and war, essentially. And what I see religious faith doing, what dogma does intrinsically, and religious dogma especially, is it stops the conversation. I mean, dogma are those beliefs that you have taken off the table, that are no longer there to be revised through new evidence and new argument. And these are the dogmas, these are the beliefs around which people are making their strongest claims about us, them, in-group, out-group, sort of tribalism. And so I think the only thing that guarantees that our collaboration with one another is truly open-ended is a willingness to have our beliefs about the world and our behavior revised through conversation, and that is science broadly construed.
So you are advocating the introduction of reason and argument into helping along human interactions into a more compassionate.
Well, I think they started that several hundred years ago. That was the whole point of the Enlightenment.
Yes. So,
but wouldn't your own research, Scott, on the psychology of terrorism, how to build a terrorist,
yes.
wouldn't that be applying science to understanding something that ultimately has political implications?
Yes, of course. But I'm just questioning the fact whether science should get involved in the processes of political motivations and happenings.
Can I just address that briefly? I had the honor of giving a tour of our new facility in New York. It was new 6 years ago, to Richard Holbrooke, who was shortly had finished his tour of duty as American ambassador to the United Nations. And he was a neighbor, so we did this for him. And I'm showing him the moon and the planets and the stars, and and he starts asking questions. And he says, well, how much more is the effect of the moon being closer now that I just learned that it's an elliptical orbit on the tides? I said, oh, good point. There's a strong distance dependence on tide. And we start going around. And the stars, some are red. It must be a temperature thing going on there. Yeah, some are cooler. And he starts asking these questions, and I'm saying, well, this guy just came out of the Balkans in conversations with the unrest over there, and he's asking me informed questions about the cosmos. And so I said to him, where does this come from? This is not just, where did this come from? And he said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you. Actually, in college, I majored in physics. Okay, and he switched his major like the last year or something. But he had this inculcation in sort of rational scientific thought that goes on in any physics curriculum. And I said, well, how? Then I asked your question. And I said, has this worked in any one way or another, positively or negatively, in your negotiations, in your peace talks? And he said, I cannot imagine having accomplished what I did without that kind of thinking. Because, of course, in physics, you distill a problem to its essence, find out that you shed what you don't need, look at what matters, and you discuss what matters. And when other people come in with their baggage, he cuts right through it and is able to reach consensus in ways that others can't or can't even imagine. And so getting back to Steve's point, it's not so much that a law of physics gets invoked to solve an international problem, but certainly the training that goes on in the mind of a scientist has got to be useful in solving problems, even interpersonal problems, more useful than not having that kind of background, as evidenced by at least this one
I agree with what you said, except for the last thing, interpersonal problems. No, not in a facetious way either. I agree with you completely. I think what we should really need to teach is process of science, is how, and that's what we try and do. And certainly, I'm as chair of the physics department. That's what we try and do. But I'm a little worried about this notion that people are intrinsically rational. I don't think people are intrinsically rational. I mean, there's a rational component to humans, but I think we depend on most of us on our irrationality to get through every day. And maybe, to be happy, you have to be delusional. I don't know. Maybe science will discover that. If we discover that in order to be happy, you have to be delusional at some point in your life, are we going to say you shouldn't be delusional? I don't know. I think that the notion that rationality is a central and major part of human life is not at all clear when I look around the world.
Nobody said that. We're just saying it's
our job
essential to solving a debate.
It's very useful, and I think it's essential. I think it's an essential component, and it's our job to encourage it. But I think we are fooling ourselves to think that we'll ever live in a world that's completely rational.
Yeah, I'm not saying that. I think we should address this point because there's a yawning chasm of nihilism waiting us if we don't seal it up. The idea that there's this opposition to speak rationally, yeah.
Widening chasm of nihilism.
There are many justifications for madness have been coming out of that hole. This opposition between reason and everything else, I think, is fundamentally spurious. I think this idea that there's love on the one hand and then the cool rationality of science that's just all clatter and clockwork and soulless, this is a false dichotomy, and it's a dichotomy that is pervasive in the culture. You can't I can't tell you how many times I get on the radio and someone says, "Scientifically prove to me that you love your wife." As though that were just the knockdown argument of all time against reason and in support of faith. There's nothing irrational in principle about love. I mean, it is rational to value love. It is rational to try to recognize that it is one of our most cherished experiences, and then to try to live a life that maximizes it. Understanding love at the level of the brain is not going to deflate its importance for us. And the fact that we can understand the molecular constituents of chocolate doesn't make us not want to eat chocolate. I mean, these are different scales of interaction with the world. And so it's not a matter of only being coldly calculating in our approach to life, but where we have to call a spade is in gratuitous claims to certainty about invisible realities and the moral structure to the universe, about a God who so hates homosexuality that he will whip up tsunamis in defense of chaste heterosexual people. I mean, this is a vision of life that is animating millions and millions of our neighbors, and we have been cowed into not criticizing it. And I mean, to pick up what Pat Churchland said, this job is not best done by scientists. We need, from 100 sides, culture at large to just make it fundamentally embarrassing to hold these kinds of certainties. And I don't know if you know about how the KKK, how its stature got so eroded in this country, but there's this great little story about this guy Stetson Kennedy, who leaked. He joined the KKK, and then he leaked all their goofy lingo and secret passwords to the people who were writing the Adventures of Superman radio series back in the 40s. And so every week, it was Superman fighting the KKK with all the up-to-the-minute passwords and handshakes and bogus, cultish nonsense. And so these grand wizards would come home and they would see their kids playing the KKK versus Superman on the front lawn, and with Superman winning and all the current passwords. And they found this so humiliating, and this was so corrosive. And Stetson Kennedy was still, inside the Klan. He would see the aftermath of these effects at meetings, and I'm sure there were other variables involved. But the KKK is functionally a defunct organization, whereas it had 20 million members, among whom were senators and even one president. It's possible to make progress. And I think we just have to keep that in view.
So at this point, since we're coming up to lunch and Steve has to leave afterwards, I'd like to go from the yawning chasm of nihilism of Sam Harris to the cosmological corner.
Don't say that a second time. Once was enough for my ears.
So I'm the guy who gets to keep you from your lunch. It's even worse than that because I have to leave right away. I have to be in Austin tomorrow morning, and so after I finish saying what I'm going to say, I'm going to disappear.
Going out the back door?
In a puff of smoke.
That's a great opportunity then.
But I think I'm glad to have a chance to address this without any hope of answering the question, because I think it's such an important question. If not religion, what? Certainly, I'm not one of those who would rhapsodically say, oh, science, that's all we need to do is understand the world and look at pictures of the Eagle Nebula, and it'll fill us with such joy, we won't miss religion. I think we will miss it. I see religion somewhat as a crazy old aunt that, she tells lies and she stirs up all sorts of mischief, and she's getting on, and she may not have that much life left in her. But, she was beautiful once, and when she's gone, we may miss her. She's been with us for a long time. The desire for myths and but still, she does a lot of harm, and it's good that she's going. The desire for myths and for consolation, Sam spoke of that very movingly, having to console people for the deaths of their loved ones. It's something science can't provide, the sense of magic about the world. Also, with all these things that religion can do, it adds to it then that you do it in a community of fellow believers, of fellow Christians or Jews or Muslims or whatever. There's a religious mentality that yearns for that. And there's a great danger in this with the disappearance of religion, that the religious mentality will not disappear. It's often been pointed out, for those of us who discount the moral value of religion, that some of the greatest evils of the 20th century were perpetrated by regimes that were not at all religious. Nazi Germany, Stalinist Russia, Maoist China, Pol Pot's Cambodia. But the leaders of those regimes were not mere thugs. They played on the desire of their people for a big truth, for something about which they could organize their lives. People want that big truth, whether it's racial superiority or the dictatorship of the proletariat. They want sacred scriptures, whether it's Mein Kampf or the Little Red Book. And that danger, I think, is not very different from the danger posed by religion. It's the danger of the religious mentality that wants something transcendent in our lives that will join us together with other people who are like ourselves and will answer all the difficult questions about how to balance one thing and another in our lives. In opposition to that, the reasonable person, the scientist, what can we offer? We can offer just a lot of little truths. We should be good to each other, and we should try to be honest, sometimes even to ourselves. We should enjoy beauty where it exists, and if we possibly can, create a little bit ourselves. These little truths which we pursue individualistically, not in communions, these do not provide that excitement that the religious mentality hungers for. But it may be all we have, and we have to try to live with that. How can we live with so little? Well, it's not easy. One can take a certain grim satisfaction in recognizing things as they are. For example, again, Sam said, it doesn't take away from love that we understand the biochemical basis of love. It doesn't necessarily take away from it, but it takes a certain balancing to be able to live in a world where our finest emotions are at the same time something we understand in non-spiritual ways, in biochemical ways. We have to have them both in our minds at the same time and take a certain grim satisfaction in the fact that we can deal with that and still love. Richard Dawkins is here, so I will say that this is an ideology I'm describing that is not a meme. This is not something that naturally lends itself to self-perpetuation by punishing disbelievers, say. This is life without religion is difficult. It's not easy to do without it. We have to try and do our best. I don't have any simple answers. Perhaps other people here will have better things to say about how we can live without religion. Without religion, what? One small thing I might add is that one of the things that where religion itself can be helpful is in providing a source of humor. That I think humor is, of all human traits, one of the ones that will survive and provides a great consolation. In the works of Shakespeare, I think his greatest moments are when, in the midst of tragedy, some comic proletarian comes on the stage, a gravedigger or a doorkeeper or a gardener or a seller of figs, who wishes you joy of the worm, and the humor puts the tragedy in context and gives you a sense of being able to see human affairs from a greater perspective. And religion, the whole long, sorry history of monks and rabbis, priests, ulams, bonzes, ayatollahs, it's a running river of harmless merriment that will go on, I think, amusing us long after people have stopped taking it seriously. Thank you.